Wind, off Lake Michigan, arrived early that December. Not gradually, the way seasons are supposed to shift, but all at once, like a door kicked open. By the time Daniel Hayes finished his last repair of the evening and walked out of the garage bay into the alley behind Clark Street, the temperature had dropped a full 12 degrees since noon. Snow was falling horizontally, lit amber by the sodium lamps overhead, and the sidewalks had gone glassy. He walked with his collar turned up and his hands deep in the pockets of his canvas work jacket. The kind that had never been warm enough for real winter, but that he wore anyway because it was the jacket he had. He was thinking about the next morning, about whether Ethan's snow boots still fit, about the permission slip that needed signing, about whether there was enough milk for breakfast, the ordinary architecture of a single father's evening mind. He heard them before he saw them. 3 male voices. Too loud for the hour, with the specific loose quality of men who have been drinking and are no longer particularly interested in how they sound. He turned the corner onto Clark and stopped. At the bus shelter 20 feet ahead, 3 men had arranged themselves in a half circle around a young woman pressed against the glass back panel. She was 20, maybe 22. She had a dark green backpack held tight against her chest with both arms. The way a person holds something they need to believe cannot be taken from them. Her face was composed, not frightened, exactly, but something more controlled than that. Watchful, calculating the geometry of the situation. One of the men reached toward the backpack strap. She turned slightly away. He reached again. Daniel had not made a conscious decision by the time he was walking toward them. That was the honest truth of it. There was no deliberation, no weighing of risk. His body simply moved in the direction that needed to be moved in. He stepped into the circle of light from the shelter and stood between the woman and the man who had been reaching for the strap. Not dramatically. Not with any particular posture of threat. He simply occupied the space. "She waiting for the 36?" he said. The man who had been reaching looked at him. He was a big man, not as tall as Daniel but thicker through the chest, with the particular overconfidence of someone who had rarely been told no. "Mind your business," the man said. "She is my business," Daniel said. "She's my cousin." He did not look at the woman when he said it. He kept his eyes on the man who had spoken, and the steadiness of his gaze did a specific kind of work. It was not aggressive. It was just completely, unmistakably certain, the look of a man who has already decided what he will do and is not anxious about it. The moment stretched. The second man muttered something to the first. The third was already looking down the street, reorienting toward a different evening. "Your loss," the first man said. Eventually, they moved on. Not quickly enough to look like they were retreating, but they moved. Daniel stood where he was until they had turned the corner. Then he turned and looked at the woman properly for the first time. She was pale, fine-boned, with dark circles under gray eyes that were now studying him with an expression that was neither grateful nor distrustful, more precisely. Measuring. Her clothes were good quality but deliberately nondescript, a dark wool coat that was slightly too large, boots that had real mileage on them. The backpack, now he looked at it, was almost aggressively plain. A person who owned things but had chosen not to look like someone who owned things. "Are you all right?" he asked. "Yes. A beat. Thank you. Bus should be 7 minutes, he said. He looked up at the digital board inside the shelter. 6, she nodded. He stepped back, meaning to continue on his way. "You made that up," she said. "The cousin thing." "Yes. You could have just stood there." That would have worked too. He considered so, maybe. Seemed easier to give them an exit. She looked at him with that measuring quality again. Why? He thought about it honestly. Because if they don't have an exit, sometimes they decide the situation needs escalating. And there's a 7-year-old at home who needs his father's face intact. Something shifted in her expression, not quite a smile, but a softening. Smart. He had already started walking when she called after him. "You left your jacket." He turned. She was holding out the canvas work jacket that had, without him quite noticing, ended up around her shoulders. He had not removed it consciously, had not felt the cold in the moment, and now he looked at it as if at an object he did not entirely recognize. "Keep it," he said. It's not very warm anyway. That's not a reason to keep it. Call it a loan, he said, because something in her expression suggested she would not accept a gift. You can return it to Hayes Auto on Fullerton. I'm there every day. She looked at the name embroidered on the breast pocket of the jacket. Hayes. Then she looked at him. He walked on. He did not look back. The bus, he noticed from half a block away, arrived exactly 6 minutes later. Daniel Hayes was 36 years old, and he had, over the preceding 4 years, developed a very specific relationship with order. The garage occupied the ground floor of a narrow building on Fullerton, sandwiched between a dry cleaner and a Thai restaurant, whose exhaust fans sent the smell of lemongrass through the rear wall on busy nights. It was not a big operation, 4 bays, 1 full-time mechanic besides himself, a part-timer on Saturdays. The name on the sign was his father's name first, and then his. He had taken it over 7 years ago, and had, in the way of people who find their work genuinely interesting, made it considerably better than he found it. He was good with engines the way some people are good with language intuitively, in a way that preceded the formal understanding. He could hear a fault in a timing chain before the diagnostic equipment confirmed it. He trusted this. He did not trust most other things the same way. His son, Ethan, was 7, and looked precisely like photographs of Daniel at the same age that still lived in a box in the back of the closet. Dark-haired, solemn when thinking, suddenly and completely radiant when something genuinely pleased him, Ethan attended Prescott Elementary, ate an unreasonable amount of peanut butter, and had recently become interested in bridges, not in a casual way, but in the way children sometimes become interested in things, with an intensity that crowds out most other topics of conversation. Daniel's wife, Carol, had died in a highway accident when Ethan was 3. A semi-drifting lanes in freezing rain on I-90. A Tuesday afternoon in February, nothing dramatic in any of the ways that the word dramatic usually implies, just the ordinary catastrophic randomness of a world indifferent to the plans of the people moving through it. Daniel had not, in the 4 years since, described himself as grieving, because the word felt too theatrical for what the experience actually was. What it actually was: a restructuring, a rebuilding of every assumption about what the next 20 years would look like. He did this quietly, methodically, without complaint, because there was a child who needed a functional parent and who had not asked for any of this either. He had, in the process of this restructuring, become somewhat spare with himself. He slept enough. He ate reasonably. He maintained friendships at a careful distance, present enough to sustain them, closed enough that they required nothing he was not sure he could consistently provide. He had, on 2 occasions in the last 4 years, allowed something that could generously be described as dating to occur. And both times had ended the thing before it became a thing, without particular drama, because it had felt not dishonest, exactly, but like an expenditure of something he was not yet certain he could afford. He was not unhappy. That was the precise truth of it. He was functional, purposeful, and very careful about the square footage of his emotional life. He ran the garage the way he managed most things, with a preference for problems that had identifiable sources and tractable solutions. An engine that misfired could be diagnosed. A failing bearing announced itself through sound and vibration. He had learned to listen to the language of machines, which was honest in a way he respected. A machine did not pretend to be fine when it was not. It communicated its distress through symptoms, and the symptoms led, if you were patient and methodical, to the root cause. People were more complicated. He had always known this, but grief had made it concrete in a way that experience alone had not. He understood now, with the specificity that only loss delivers, that people could appear to be fine, could appear to be operating within normal parameters, and be failing internally in ways that were not audible, not visible, not accessible to any ordinary diagnostic. Carol had been fine on the Tuesday morning she drove to work. He had kissed her at the door and made a small complaint about the weather and said he would pick up groceries on the way home, and she had been fine. And then she had not been, and the gap between those 2 states had contained no warning, no symptom, nothing to hear. He had rebuilt himself around the absence of that certainty and deliberateness, to invest in things that could not be taken suddenly, in the work, which was dependable because it was physical, in Ethan, whose needs were concrete and whose development he could observe directly. In the ordered rhythm of the life he had constructed, the early mornings, the predictable structure of the days, the small reliable pleasures of a cup of coffee, made well, and a job completed correctly. This was not grief, exactly. It was caution. The distinction mattered to him. The canvas work jacket hung on the hook by the garage office door for 6 days before it was not there anymore. She appeared on a Tuesday. Shortly after 9 in the morning, Daniel noticed her because the garage had a window that faced the sidewalk, and she was standing at the edge of it, not in front of it, not peering in, but at the periphery, in the approximate location where someone would stand if they were watching the work being done without quite intending to be seen watching. She had the green backpack. She was wearing the canvas jacket over her coat, which made him feel obscurely responsible for the fact that she was cold. He went to the door. "You found it," he said. She looked at him steadily. "I wanted to return it. You could have mailed it. I don't know your mailing address." This was technically true. He stepped back from the doorway. It was a gesture, not quite an invitation, more a removal of the obstacle. She came in. Her name was Lena. She offered this without a last name, and he did not ask for one. She looked at the garage the way people sometimes look at places where actual work gets done, with the attentive interest of someone who is genuinely watching a process rather than waiting for it to conclude. She watched Carl, his full-time mechanic, run a compression test on a 2019 Civic with the focused patience of someone who was learning rather than enduring. Daniel handed her a mug of coffee from the machine in the office. She took it with both hands. "You work here alone?" she asked. "Carl," he said, inclining his head toward the bay, "and Tommy on Saturdays." She nodded. Drank the coffee. Looked at the car, on the lift. "The timing?" she asked. He looked at her. "Compression first. Could be valves. How do you tell the difference in the sound?" It was not the question he expected. He answered it honestly, the way he would answer Ethan, with the actual explanation, rather than a simplified version of it. She listened in the same way Ethan listened, entirely, without performing understanding she did not have. She left after an hour, the jacket still in her hands. At the door she stopped and seemed to make a small decision. "Can I come back?" she asked. He thought about this for a moment that was slightly longer than it needed to be. "Doors open at 7, he said. She came back on Thursday, and the Friday after that, and then with increasing regularity, until her presence before noon became unremarkable to Carl, who was a man of few curiosities, and had adopted a policy of neither commenting on her nor ignoring her, a social middle distance that suited everyone. She swept the shop floor without being asked. She organized the parts shelving with a systematic precision that Daniel recognized as the work of someone who understood categorization at a level beyond the obvious. She did not explain herself or narrate her actions. She was simply present, useful, quiet, and he could not have explained precisely when he began to notice this, watching him with a quality of attention that was not intrusive, but that was unmistakably there. He found this, against his expectations, not discomfiting. Ethan met Lena on a Wednesday afternoon in the third week of December, when school let out at 2:30, and Daniel had not yet arranged cover for the late slot. And so Ethan came to the garage after school, as he sometimes did, with his backpack and his bridge diagrams and the particular gravity of a child who knows he is expected to behave. Lena was reorganizing a section of the wire rack when Ethan came through the door. He stopped and looked at her with the frank appraisal that children deploy before adults have socialized it out of them. "Who are you?" he asked. "Lena," she said. "Do you work here?" She considered this. "I help out. Carl says you're better at organizing than he is." "Carl is very good at engines," Lena said, which Daniel recognized as a precise and diplomatic answer. True in its entirety, sidesteps the implied comparison entirely. Ethan went to his regular corner, the fold-out chair beside the small desk Daniel kept for paperwork, and produced a sheet of graph paper covered in pencil drawings. He studied these for a moment, and then, in what Daniel had learned to recognize as his son's version of an olive branch, held the sheet toward Lena. "Do you know what kind of bridge this is?" Lena crossed the garage floor, crouched to his eye level, and looked at the drawing. "Suspension," she said. "The main cables go from the anchor points on either side to the top of the towers. And the vertical ones, the suspenders hang from those to hold the deck." Ethan stared at her. "Most people say it's just a bridge. Most people aren't looking at it properly. How do you know about bridges?" "I know a little about a lot of things," Lena said. "How do you know about bridges?" "I looked them up," Ethan said simply. Daniel, pretending to review an invoice at the workbench, watched his son ask Lena whether the Mackinac Bridge could handle an earthquake, and watched Lena engage with this question with the same quality of attention she brought to everything, complete, unhurried, without condescension. She did not simplify her answers, but she modulated the vocabulary. She treated the question as a real question. When they left that evening, Ethan walked the first block in silence, his thinking silence, not his unhappy one. "She's smart," he said finally. "Yes," Daniel said. "Is she going to keep coming?" "I don't know." Ethan nodded. "Then, I hope she does." Daniel did not answer. But he did not disagree. The snow came again in the second week of January, heavy and determined, and the garage was busy with winter damage, salt corrosion, a cracked engine block, 2 sets of snow tires that had not been put on early enough and now had their consequences. Daniel worked through the backlog methodically, and Lena, increasingly without ceremony, worked alongside him. It was during the cracked block job, a 2017 pickup, that had been brought in with an overheating complaint and revealed, upon disassembly, a fault line in the coolant jacket that should have been caught in the factory pressure test, that Daniel first registered something more than competence. He had the block on the bench and was explaining to Carl the path of the fracture when Lena, who had been standing slightly behind them, said, "It's not the fracture that's the primary problem." Both men looked at her. "The fracture is the symptom," she said. She pointed, not gesturing vaguely, but indicating a specific point on the block's upper face with the end of a steel rule. "The metal fatigue started here. The coolant channel geometry creates a stress concentration at that corner under thermal cycling. If you just weld the fracture, you'll see another one within 2 seasons. Probably along this axis." She traced a line with the rule. "The underlying issue is that the channel wall at that point is below spec, probably a casting defect that passed QC, because it was within tolerance individually but interacts badly with the adjacent geometry." Carl looked at Daniel. Daniel looked at the block. She was right. He had not seen it because he had been focused on the fracture, the visible failure, rather than the conditions that had produced it. It was the kind of observation that required not just knowledge of the subject but a particular quality of analytical attention. The ability to hold multiple variables simultaneously and trace their interactions. "Where did you learn engineering?" he asked. He kept his voice level. It was a simple question. She was quiet for a moment, the specific quality of quiet that is not evasion but decision-making. "I picked things up," she said. He let it sit. She let it sit. Carl, with his fine social instincts, picked up a wrench and went back to work. But the question changed something between them, established the fact of the question, the fact that it was valid, and the fact that it had not yet been answered. Daniel did not push. He had learned, through the long patient education of rebuilding a life, that some things have to be arrived at in their own time. He noted, without drawing conclusions, the following. She had no phone he had ever seen her use. She had no car. She paid for her coffee and the occasional lunch from a wallet that contained cash only and no visible cards. She knew the content of 3 distinct technical manuals that lived on the shelf in the garage office, and she had read them thoroughly enough to cross-reference between them. She was not, by any obvious evidence, homeless. Her clothes were clean. Her coat was good. But she had arranged her life to leave no paper. Someone who had made, consciously and deliberately, the decision to be traceable by no one. He recognized the impulse. He had done a version of it himself, not geographically, but emotionally. The impulse to reduce your footprint. To need less so that losing things hurt less. He did not know what she was reducing her footprint from. He found himself, on a Thursday evening in January, genuinely uncertain whether he wanted to know. The man came on a Friday morning in late January. And he was so precisely what certain men in a certain type of profession look like, that Daniel recognized the category before he could have articulated why. Mid-50s, a coat that fit exceptionally well, the controlled patience of a man who was accustomed to waiting for other people to realize they had no choice. He came through the garage door at 10 in the morning and asked for Lena. Daniel was under a Toyota Camry and heard the exchange between Carl and the man from below. "No one by that name here," Carl said. "I think there is," the man said, pleasantly. Daniel rolled out from under the car and stood. He looked at the man. The man looked at him. "Mr. Hayes?" The man said. "Yes, my name is Whitmore. Richard Whitmore. I'm looking for my daughter." He paused. "Her name is actually Helena Whitmore." The silence that followed was long enough to be significant. From the office doorway she had been cataloging parts invoices. Lena appeared. She stood in the doorframe with a stillness that was not peace but the muscular holding together of a person who has been preparing for a specific thing for a long time. "Dad," she said. Her voice was even. Richard Whitmore looked at his daughter for a long moment. He was not. And Daniel watched this, carefully angry. He was something more complicated than that. Exhausted, perhaps, relieved in a way that had not yet found its expression. "Come home, Helena," he said. "No, I've given you 3 months. I didn't ask for 3 months. I asked to be left alone." They looked at each other across the garage floor with the specific weight of people who have had this conversation before, in different rooms, with different words, reaching the same stalemate. There was love in it. Entangled, pressured, difficult love, but present. Richard Whitmore turned to Daniel. "I want to thank you," he said, "for providing a place." "She doesn't need you to thank him," Lena said, with a precision that closed the sentence. After another exchange of looks, her father produced a card from his breast pocket, set it on the workbench, and walked back out into the cold without further argument. A man who understood leverage and knew when he had none. Daniel looked at the card. The embossed logo read Whitmore Systems. Below it, Richard A. Whitmore, Chairman. He put the card face down on the bench and went back to work on the Camry. He did not speak until Lena had returned to the invoices. Then he said quietly, "Whitmore Systems. That's the infrastructure company. The Chicago headquarters." "Yes," she said. "You're the daughter. I'm the heir," she said. "Which is different." A beat. Which is the whole problem. He did not say anything. He slid back under the Camry. The silence that settled over the garage was complicated. Something had entered the space that had not been there before. Not deception, he had never asked her about herself, in ways she had evaded. But a context, a scale, the knowledge that her life, its defaults and expectations, and the gravitational pull that had sent her to a bus stop on Clark Street with a backpack and a deliberately untraceable wallet was a life that existed several orders of magnitude removed from his. He told himself, as he worked, that this changed nothing. That she had been useful, present, honest about the things that actually mattered between people. That she had not pretended to be something she was not, she had simply not described something she was. He told himself this for 4 days. Then, on a Tuesday morning, he told her she probably should not come back. He said it without cruelty and without particular explanation. He said, "I think we both know this doesn't make sense. You have people looking for you. You have a life." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she picked up her backpack and left. The garage felt, by 2 in the afternoon, significantly larger than its actual square footage. February came with the brutal arithmetic of midwinter. Short days, extended cold, the specific grinding fatigue of a season that shows no signs of concluding. Daniel worked. He made Ethan's lunches and helped with the bridge project that had now expanded into a scale model of the George Washington Bridge, made from balsa wood and a concentrated force of will. He called his mother on Sunday evenings. He did these things correctly, efficiently, and without particular feeling. Carl asked him once, obliquely, in the way Carl asked everything. "The girl coming back?" "No," Daniel said. Carl nodded. He did not ask again. Ethan asked more directly. He asked on a Wednesday when Daniel was making pasta, and Ethan was at the kitchen table with the bridge model. And he asked it the way children ask things, without preamble, without softening, without any of the social scaffolding that adults build around hard questions. "Why isn't Lena coming anymore? She had to go back to her life." "What does that mean?" Daniel turned from the stove. He looked at his son, who was looking at him with an expectation of honesty that 7-year-olds have and most adults lose. "It means her life and our life are very different," he said. So, he had no immediate answer for this. "She was good at being here," Ethan said, with the simple accuracy of a child stating a fact. "Yes," Daniel said. "That should be enough." He turned back to the stove. His son's logic, stated simply, was extremely hard to argue with. It was not naive. It was, in fact, rather precisely right about the thing he had been refusing to look at directly. That he had sent her away not because her presence was inappropriate, but because it was too appropriate, because it fit too well, because the garage had felt different with her in it, and he had responded to this feeling the way he responded to all feelings he could not afford to be wrong about, by removing the source. He had been protecting himself. He could admit this, at least internally. While stirring pasta, he was not certain he had been wrong to. He was also not certain he had been right. What he was certain of was this: the week after she left, he had reorganized the wire rack. Not because it needed reorganizing, she had left it in better order than it had ever been, but because the act of rearranging gave his hand something to do that was not the act of reaching for his phone to call a number he did not have. He had reorganized the rack, and then stood back and looked at it, and the honest assessment was that it was worse than before he had started, and he had put it back the way she had left it. He did not mention this to Carl. Carl had the tact to not mention it either. The month had the grinding quality of something that was supposed to be over and was not. He went through the motions of the ordinary with the specific care of a man who knows the ordinary is all that is keeping him from something less manageable. He made the lunches and signed the forms and paid the invoices and returned the calls and was, by every external measure, fine. Ethan watched him the way Ethan watched things quietly, from the side, storing the observations for later use. The call came from Prescott Elementary on a Thursday in mid-February. Not a serious call. Ethan was not hurt. Had not been hurt, but the kind of call that required a parent to come in, and Daniel arrived at the school at 3:15 to find his son sitting outside the principal's office, with a closed, carefully neutral expression that Daniel recognized as the face Ethan wore when he was managing something he did not have language for yet. The situation, reconstructed from the principal's account and Ethan's careful, one-sentence contributions. A group of older boys had been targeting Ethan's bridge model during lunch for 2 weeks, making comments that had escalated from mockery to deliberate interference. That day, one of them had broken a section of the suspension cable. Ethan had not reacted. He had picked up the pieces, put them in his bag, and gone back to class, and said nothing to anyone until the teacher asked him directly why he was quiet. In the car, Daniel tried. He tried the reasonable father approaches. That it said nothing about Ethan, that they would fix the model, that these things passed. Ethan listened politely and stared at the windshield with the face of a person who has been given the correct words for the wrong problem. That night, after dinner, Daniel sat beside his son on the couch and said, "Tell me what you actually want me to say." Ethan was quiet for a while. "I want to know how you made them leave," he said. "At the bus stop. The men. You just stood there, and they left. How do you do that?" Daniel looked at his hands for a moment. "I wasn't sure they would," he said. "I just decided that if they didn't, I was willing to deal with what happened next. The certainty about that, I think people can see it." "I'm not sure about what happens next," Ethan said. "No," Daniel said. "You're 7. This almost made Ethan smile. "I think," Daniel said slowly, "that you don't need to be certain about what happens next. You need to be certain about what you value. The bridge matters to you. That's not embarrassing. That's just true. Ethan, something like that, he said. Lena. She said the question isn't whether people make fun of things you care about. The question is whether you let that change what you care about. Daniel looked at his son. When did she say that? When you were under the Camry. She was teaching me about bridge load calculations, and I told her some kids at school thought it was weird. Ethan paused. She said kids make fun of things they don't understand, because it's easier than understanding them. A silence settled between them. Outside, snow was starting again. Light and purposeful. Do you miss her? Daniel asked. Ethan considered this with his usual care. Yes, he said. Do you? Daniel was quiet for long enough that the answer was implicit. Dad, Ethan said, with the specific patience of a child who has been watching an adult be unnecessarily complicated about something obvious. She was good at being here. He found her at a coffee shop on Damon on a Saturday morning in late February. He had not expected to. He had gone there because he went there most Saturdays, because they made good coffee and the corner booth was quiet. And because he was not, he told himself, looking for her. She was in the corner booth. She looked up when he came in, and neither of them performed surprise. She closed the technical journal she had been reading. He caught the title, A Paper on Fatigue Analysis in Cast Metals, and waited. He sat across from her. The waitress brought him coffee without being asked, because he was a regular. He wrapped both hands around the mug. I owe you an explanation, he said. You don't, actually, she said. You don't owe me anything. I sent you away because I was scared, he said. Not of you. Of what it meant that I didn't want you to go. She looked at him steadily. The Whitmore thing, he said. That was a reason I gave myself. A credible reason. But it wasn't the real reason. What was the real reason? He considered how honest to be. And then decided to be entirely honest, because partial honesty was a form of management. And he was tired of managing. My wife died 4 years ago, he said, and I have spent 4 years being very careful about what I let matter to me, because losing things I know how that works now, and you were starting to matter to me in a way I hadn't planned for. And my first instinct was to stop it before it became a loss. She was quiet for a long time. I know about that instinct, she said. He looked at her. I left, she said slowly, because I was turning 30 in March. And I had spent 29 years having my life constructed for me by people who loved me and were completely certain they knew what was best for me. My father is a good man. I want you to understand that. He's not a villain. He just has a very specific idea of who I'm supposed to be, and he's never been able to imagine that the person I might choose to be could be different from that, and also good. She looked out the window at the snow. I didn't disappear to hurt him. I disappeared to find out what I was like when nobody was watching, when none of it was attached to the name. And, he said, I'm good with engines, she said. And apparently I know how to sweep a shop floor. He almost smiled. I wasn't deceiving you, she said. I want to be clear about that. I never told you I was nobody. I just stopped being Helena Whitmore for a while, tried being Lena, no last name, and seeing what was left. What was left? She looked at him with the gray eyes that had been measuring him since the bus shelter in December. This, she said, which surprised me. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Ethan wants to know if you'll look at the bridge model. He broke a section of the suspension cable. He didn't break it, she said. The kids at school did. He looked at her. He told you? The day it started happening. He asked me what he should do. She paused. I didn't have a perfect answer. But I told him the bridge was worth fixing. Daniel was quiet for a long moment. Come back, he said. If you want. Not because it makes sense. Not because it fits any particular category. Just come back, if you want to. She picked up the technical journal, she thought. She set it down again. I need to call my father first, she said. I need to do that properly. Not disappear again, in a different direction. That's fair, he said. And I want to be useful, she said. Not as a project. Not as I'm not interested in being the rich girl who played at being normal for a season. If I'm there because I'm good at it. and because I want to be. You are good at it, he said. The fatigue analysis on the block was right. Carl checked the wall thickness after you left. I know, she said. Carl texted me. He looked at her. He asked for my number before you sent me away, she said, with a precision that was not quite pointed. He said I was better at the wire rack than anyone who had touched it in 6 years. Spring came late to Chicago that year, arriving in patches a warm afternoon, then cold again, then a genuine warmth that by mid-April had become reliable. The snow retreated to the edges of parking lots, gray and stubborn, and then it was gone. Helena Whitmore called her father on a Sunday in early March, from the coffee shop on Damon where she had been having coffee every Saturday morning anyway, and they talked for an hour and a half. The conversation was difficult and honest, and went the way conversations go when two people who love each other have been avoiding saying the true things. He did not understand, entirely, but he listened, which is different from understanding, and is often more important. She did not go home. She found an apartment on a tree-lined street in Wicker Park, a second-floor walk-up with tall windows and radiator heat that rattled pleasantly at night, and she furnished it with the specific pleasure of someone choosing things for the first time. She chose a good reading chair and a kitchen table and bookshelves that she filled with technical texts and, on the bottom shelf, the small collection of novels that she had been carrying in the green backpack since October. She came back to the garage. She came back in a specific way, not as a fixture, not as someone with a claim, but as someone who showed up because showing up was what she had decided to do. She worked on the Tuesdays and Thursdays and Saturday mornings that she had established as her pattern. And she did the work that needed doing, and she and Daniel rebuilt the uncomplicated ease of working alongside someone whose competence you trust. It was slow. That was the honest thing about it, the thing worth saying. It did not snap back to what it had been before, or leap forward to something it had not yet become. It accumulated, the way trust accumulates, in small increments, mostly unremarked upon, until one day you realize you are somewhere different from where you were. She and Ethan finished the George Washington Bridge model over 2 consecutive Saturday afternoons in April, working at the kitchen table with balsa strips and specialized glue and a set of instructions that Lena had printed from an engineering site and annotated in the margins. The finished model was displayed on the shelf in Ethan's room beside his lamp, and he told his class about the main cable geometry at show and tell, and 2 kids who had previously been uninterested asked him questions about it afterward. And none of this solved everything, but it was something. In May, Daniel proposed after a long conversation about the business, about the pressure she had been getting from her father, about returning to Whitmore Systems, about what she wanted from the next decade that they look at expanding the garage. The space next door had come available. There was a possibility, with the right approach to the work, of adding a diagnostic side to the operation. Taking on fleet contracts, building something with enough scale to be genuinely stable rather than merely survivable. Lena sat across from him at the workbench where they had been having this conversation, surrounded by invoices and coffee cups and the particular organized clutter of a working space, and she thought about it the way she thought about everything. Thoroughly, without rushing toward the answer. Not Whitmore money, she said. I want to be clear about that. If we do this, we do it on what the business can support. Agreed, he said, and not Hayes Auto, probably, if we're changing the scope. Something that says what it actually does. Fine, he said, and Carl has to be part of it. Real part. He already is, Daniel said. She looked at the garage at Carl, who was currently running a diagnostic on a company fleet van under the new lights they had installed in February, and at the repainted bays, and at the wire rack she had reorganized twice now, and which had stayed organized. At the window where she had stood in December with a borrowed canvas jacket, watching the work being done inside. All right, she said. The sign went up in June. Hayes and Whitmore Automotive. Ethan designed it, with input regarding the typography from Lena, who had opinions about this. Carl installed it on a Saturday morning with the quiet ceremony of a man who does not make speeches, but is pleased by things when they are done well. The installation took 40 minutes. Carl used a level 3 times on a sign that was, by the second check, demonstrably level. The third check was for his own satisfaction, which was a form of respect that Daniel recognized and appreciated. Ethan stood on the sidewalk and issued commentary. Lena made coffee and brought it out. And they stood on the sidewalk in the June morning sun and drank it while Carl made his adjustments. And none of it was dramatic. And all of it was good. The business had been changing before the sign went up. Lena had, in the 3 months since she came back, brought to the operational side of the garage the same quality of attention she brought to everything. She had looked at the service records for the preceding 2 years and identified 3 fleet operators in the neighborhood who had used multiple different shops for their vehicles, a pattern that suggested no particular loyalty, that also suggested, to her systematic mind, an opportunity. She had written a proposal, brought it to Daniel not as a directive but as a question, "What do you think of this?" and waited while he read it twice and thought about it carefully. The thinking had taken him 4 days. The answer had been yes. The first fleet contract was with a plumbing company on the northwest side. 12 vans, a quarterly service agreement, a rate that made the math work without requiring the garage to grow faster than it could manage. The second came through a referral from the first. The third was still being negotiated. It was not a transformation. It was a foundation, the difference between a business that survived the year and one that could start thinking about the year after. That evening, the 4 of them, Daniel, Lena, Ethan, and Carl, who had been persuaded against his nature to stay for an hour, stood in front of the garage and looked at the sign in the late June light. Carl said it looked level, which was his form of approval. Ethan said it needed more yellow, which it did not, but which was his form of ownership. Daniel looked at it and felt something he had not felt in a long time. The uncomplicated satisfaction of something built rather than merely maintained. They walked, afterward, down to the lakefront. The lake in late June was not warm, but it was not hostile, a metallic blue in the evening light, with the skyline behind them and the horizon ahead. Ethan ran along the edge of the path with the arms-out urgency of a child in motion, narrating something about cable tension to no one in particular. Lena walked beside Daniel, her hands in the pockets of a jacket that fit her, not the canvas work jacket, which had been retired to the closet with the kind of informal ceremony due to objects that have done their work. A different jacket. Her own. They walked without particular urgency, at the pace of people who have somewhere to be and are not in a hurry to be there, which is a pace that requires a specific kind of contentment to sustain. "He knows the whole Verrazano Narrows cable specification," she said, watching Ethan. "He knew it 2 months ago," Daniel said. "I got the full recitation on the way to school. He's going to be an engineer, or a chef," Daniel said. "He's been very interested in soufflés this week." She made a sound that was, unmistakably, a laugh, not the controlled near smile she had deployed in the early weeks, but something more unguarded, produced by the actual content of what he had said, rather than by any social obligation to respond to it. He had noticed this development over the preceding months, the way her laughter had become less strategic. He considered it one of the more meaningful pieces of evidence available. They walked to the end of the path and stood looking at the water for a moment. The lake was doing what the lake always did in summer evenings, making Chicago feel briefly like somewhere else, somewhere with a horizon, somewhere not hemmed in by the ordinary grid of a city that had been built on function. The water had a quality of depth and indifference that was, somehow, not hostile, just truthful. It did not care about any of it, and had been there long enough that this was not a comment. "Your father called me," Daniel said. She looked at him. "Last week. He got the number from somewhere, I assume Carl." "Carl," she said, flatly, with the tone of someone filing away an item for future reference. "He wanted to tell me he appreciated what I had done for you," Daniel said. "Which was awkward, because I don't think I did anything in particular. I just didn't close the door. That was the thing," she said. "You'd be surprised how rare it is." He thought about this. "He asked if I had intentions," Daniel said. She turned to look at him more fully. There was something in her expression that was not quite alarm, and not quite amusement, the expression of a person recalibrating in real time. "I told him I was working on it," Daniel said. "A pause. That's a very Daniel answer," she said. It's an honest answer, he said. I am working on it. I'm not good at rushing things I want to get right. She looked at the lake. He looked at the lake. The city was behind them. The water was ahead. And Ethan was somewhere down the path, still narrating to himself about load distributions. I told my father, she said, that the question of intentions was between me and the relevant party, and that he was welcome to have opinions, but should perhaps not act on them without invitation. How did he take that? He said I sounded like myself again, she said, which I think was his way of saying he's getting used to the idea. And are you? He asked. Yourself again? She considered this with the care she brought to real questions. I'm something, she said. I'm not sure it maps exactly onto who I was before, because that person hadn't done any of this. But it feels continuous. Like I know how I got here. That's probably enough, he said. She nodded. Slowly, Ethan came back at full speed and braked against Daniel's hip, his standard method, and looked up at both of them with the uncomplicated satisfaction of a child who is exactly where he wants to be. Can we get hot dogs? He asked. Yes, said Daniel and Lena, at the same time, with the unremarkable synchrony of people who have been around each other long enough. Ethan looked between them with the expression of a child, confirming a hypothesis he has been quietly testing for some time. And then he turned back toward the city at full speed, because the prospect of hot dogs and a recently confirmed hypothesis were both excellent reasons to run. Daniel looked at Lena. Lena looked at Daniel. Neither of them said anything, because nothing needed to be said. And they had both, by this point, learned the value of leaving things that were working alone. He knew it 2 months ago, Daniel said. I got the full recitation on the way to school. He's going to be an engineer. Or a chef, Daniel said. He's been very interested in soufflés this week. She made a sound that was, unmistakably, a laugh. They watched Ethan reach the end of the path and turn back, coming at them full speed now, because he had been running in one direction and now wanted to run in the other, because he was 7, and this was enough reason. The evening settled. The lake did what lakes do, held its color a little past the time when colors should have faded, resistant to the dark. Daniel thought about Carol. He did this still, and expected he always would not, with the rawness of the first years, but with the steady acknowledgement that absence does not diminish, that it simply changes its character over time, becomes something you carry differently. He thought she would have liked Lena. The precision of her, and the stubbornness, and the way she engaged with Ethan as a full person who had full thoughts. Carol had been precise and stubborn in her own ways. And the fact that these qualities showed up differently in different people did not make them less recognizable. He was not replacing anything. That was not what this was. He was building something. It was slow and particular, and not shaped like what he had imagined, and he allowed himself this glad. Ethan reached them at full speed and put both hands out against Daniel's waist to brake, which was his standard method of stopping. Ethan, Lena said, in the tone she had developed for this, which was precisely the tone of someone who has been paying attention. The main span of the Verrazano narrows. What's the load limit? Ethan looked at her with the expression of someone offered a gift he had been hoping for. He told her. In detail. All the way back to the car. In the blue last light of the evening, with the new sign visible 3 blocks away, he told her everything he knew.